What if Rhaegar Targaryen won at the Trident? Prince Rhaegar Targaryen drives his sword through Robert Baratheon in the waters of the Trident, altering the fate of Westeros in an instant. The Crown Prince's victory shatters the rebel cause and spares House Targaryen from ruin. This is the world where Rhaegar wins and claims the Iron Throne, but triumph comes with dire consequences, and the wounds of war are slow to heal. To understand this turning point, we recall how Robert's rebellion began. It started with a prince and a northern maid. Rhaegar allegedly abducted Lyanna Stark, Lord Eddard Stark's beloved sister and Robert's betrothed. In truth, the two had fallen in love and even eloped in secret, but the realm only saw a crown prince stealing a highborn daughter. Outrage followed. When Lyanna's father, Lord Rickard Stark, rode to King's Landing to demand justice, the Mad King Aerys too responded with fire and blood. In a horrifying spectacle, Aerys executed Lord Rickard and Lyanna's elder brother Brandon Stark. Rickard was burned alive in his armor, while Brandon was forced into a strangling device, killing him as he desperately tried to save his father. This atrocity turned simmering discontent into open revolt. Aerys next demanded the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. Rather than betray his foster sons, Lord Jon Arryn of the Vale raised his banners in defiance. The great houses split between loyalists and rebels. Robert Baratheon, furious and heartbroken, declared war to rescue Lyanna and avenge the Starks. Ned Stark brought the Northmen south, joining forces with Robert's Stormlanders, Jon Arryn's Knights of the Vale, and Hoster Tully's armies from the Riverlands, secured by Ned's new marriage to Catelyn Tully. The Civil War engulfed Westeros, battles at Summerhall and Ashford, the grim Battle of the Bells, where Rhaegar's friend Jon Connington was defeated, and the Siege of Storm's End, where Lord Stannis Baratheon endured near starvation under Mace Tyrell's blockade. All paths converged on the River Trident, where Prince Rhaegar led the royal army out to finally crush the rebels. The Battle of the Trident would decide the war. Rhaegar commanded nearly 40,000 loyalists, Crownland Knights, 10,000 Dornishmen under Prince Lewin Martell, levies from the Reach, and loyal Riverland houses. Robert Baratheon's rebel host was smaller, but hardened by victory and vengeance. They met at the fork of the Trident, where the river waters ran waist-deep at the ford. Battle raged from dawn till midday. Rhaegar's rubied armor flashed as he led the crown's center, while Robert, a massive warhammer in hand, thundered commands to the rebels from his position on the front lines. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. On the rebels' left, Prince Lewin Martell's Dornish cavalry nearly outflanked the rebels until Lord Jon Royce and Sir Lyn Corbray of the Vale countercharged. Sir Lyn, grabbing the Valyrian sword, Lady Forlorn from his wounded father, cut a path through the Dornish. In the melee, Lyn Corbray slew Prince Lewin Martell, a Kingsguard and uncle to Rhaegar's wife Elia. The Dornish flank buckled, sending shockwaves of alarm through the royal army. Elsewhere, Sir Barristan Selmy fought like a whirlwind in white armor, cutting down a dozen men around Ned Stark and Robert. The famed Barristan the Bold was wounded by spears and arrows, but kept on fighting, determined to defend Rhaegar. The river itself ran red with blood and studded with wreckage corpses, broken shields. Lances snapped in two. Amidst the cries of dying men, the ford churned as knights on horseback dueled in the current, and infantry grappled knee-deep in mud. At the height of battle, Robert Baratheon spotted Rhaegar Targaryen across the waters. Both commanders knew everything hung on this moment. They spurred their war horses and met in single combat at the center of the ford, water spraying around them. Rhaegar with his long sword, Robert with the great warhammer that had felled many a foe. Their clash was ferocious. Robert's first swing crunched against Rhaegar's ornate breastplate, knocking rubies loose into the stream. Staggering in the saddle from the blow, Rhaegar almost fell, but he recovered and parried Robert's backswing at the last second, their weapons ringing with force. The young prince's face was set in determination. He could not fall here, not when the crown's fate, his family's fate, depended on him. Robert bellowed in fury and charged again, hammer whirling overhead. Rhaegar deflected the strike, the impact jarring his arm, and answered with a swift counterattack. He looped his sword in a blinding arc and struck Robert in the chest. The blade found a gap in Robert's armor and bit deep into flesh. Robert Baratheon's roar died in his throat. throat. He toppled from his horse and crashed onto the rocky riverbank, mortally wounded. For an instant, the battlefield seemed to freeze. Robert, the rebel leader, was down, and Prince Rhaegar remained on his feet, crimson sword in hand. Robert's famous warhammer tumbled into the bloody shallows. The rebel lord gasped raggedly as Rhaegar stood over him. With one final swing, Rhaegar brought his sword down, and Robert Baratheon moved no more. The shock of Robert's fall rippled through the combatants. The rebel line, which had been pushing fiercely, now wavered. Some soldiers froze in disbelief. Others cried out in despair. Leaderless, the rebel army began to break. Many threw down their arms and fled. Others yielded where they stood, the fight gone out of them at the sight of their beloved Robert slain. The royalists surged, renewed by sudden hope. "The prince has slain the usurper," went up the cry. Crownland pikemen and Dornish spearmen pushed forward on the faltering rebels. On the northern bank of the ford, Eddard Stark was rallying what men he could. He had been separated from Robert in the chaos, and now witnessed his friend's death with horror. Grief and rage surged through Ned, but so did cold realization with Robert dead. Further fighting was senseless. Their cause was lost. "Fall back," Ned shouted hoarsely to the survivors of the North End Vale. He ordered a fighting retreat, trying to save as many lives as possible. Across the ford, Lord Jon Arryn, the old hawk of the Vale, saw the day was lost and signaled his knights to pull back as well. The rebels disengaged in ragged clusters, dragging wounded comrades with them, fleeing the once promising battlefield that had become a tomb of defeat. Prince Rhaegar, despite his own injuries, raised his sword and ordered his knights to hold formation. He did not slaughter the fleeing outright, perhaps out of a sense of honor or pragmatism. The Trident's waters carried away ruby-red blood, and a few of the actual rubies knocked loose from Rhaegar's armor. Later songs would call it the Ruby Ford, where rubies littered the stream. Some say peasants found precious stones in the shallows for years to come, but in that moment, Rhaegar Targaryen only cared that victory had been won. The Dragon Prince had finally triumphed. By afternoon, the battle was over. The Trident belonged to the Targaryens. Rhaegar dismounted on the riverbank. Barely steady Robert's hammer blow had cracked several ribs and left him bruised, but he lived. He stood over Robert's corpse in grim silence for a moment. This was the man who had nearly ended the dragons forever, the man who loved Lyanna Stark as he did. Rhaegar murmured a prayer for Robert's soul, perhaps even regretting that they had been driven to this deadly duel. But war allows no room for second guessing. Around him, the royalist forces regrouped, tending to their own wounded and rounding up captives. Among those taken prisoner was Lord Eddard Stark, who had been knocked unconscious from a blow in the retreat. Several of Ned's companions lay dead or dying. The rebel losses were heavy. Lord Jon Arryn had managed to withdraw with a small rear guard toward the Vale, and Hoster Tully was wounded and fell back to the burning riverlands. But the rebellion as a whole was broken. Robert Baratheon's body was borne out of the river by some Stormland knights who surrendered it to Rhaegar. Thus ended the Battle of the Trident, the decisive clash of the war. Prince Rhaegar had saved the Iron Throne for the Targaryens for now. Even as Rhaegar was securing his victory on the Trident, King's Landing had descended into chaos. King Aerys II, the Mad King, had remained in the Red Keep, sending his last reserves to fight with Rhaegar. When word came that Robert Baratheon was dead and the rebel host scattered, many in the capital rejoiced. Grand Maester Pycelle reported the news to Aerys, expecting triumph, but Aerys' mind was far from sound. The king's triumph quickly curdled into paranoia. He received another report. Lord Tywin Lannister and a Lannister army were approaching the city gates. Tywin had remained notoriously neutral throughout most of the rebellion. Now, sensing Rhaegar's victory, he finally moved ostensibly to support the crown. But could Aerys trust him? The last time Tywin had ridden to King's Landing was years ago, when he resigned as hand in anger. Tywin's daughter Cersei had once been spurned as a match for Rhaegar. Aerys feared Lannister treachery at every turn. As evening fell, Lord Tywin's host of 10,000 Lannister men reached the outskirts of King's Landing, flying banners of friendship. From the ramparts, the gold lion on crimson looked ominous. Grand Maester Pycelle urged Aerys to open the gates, trusting Tywin as an old friend and former hand. Others in the Red Keep were less sure, but Aerys had no time to deliberate. Tywin was at the gates, and Rhaegar's main army was still leagues away at the Trident. If Tywin was truly coming to help secure the capital, Aerys needed him. If Tywin meant to betray them well, Aerys still had a final plan in place. With great fanfare, King Aerys ordered the gates opened for Lord Tywin. The Lannister forces marched in, presenting themselves as loyalists. Tywin Lannister rode at their head into the Red Keep's courtyard, armor gleaming. He proclaimed fealty to King Aerys and expressed relief at the crown's victory. Aerys, watching from the Iron Throne, was unconvinced of Tywin's sincerity. The atmosphere in the throne room was tense as Tywin's troops quietly began to take control of key positions in the city. They disarmed the last pockets of City Watch resistance and surrounded the Red Keep. It looked eerily similar to how the Lannisters had behaved in another timeline, one where they opened the city only to sack it. Those with sharp ears heard distant screams and the clash of steel in Flea Bottom. Discipline was fraying among the Lannister soldiers once they were inside the walls. The Mad King's paranoia ignited. Aerys decided he would not be made a fool of or a prisoner in his own castle. If Tywin meant to seize the capital, Aerys would not let him have it. The king had a hideous fallback plan: wildfire. Unknown to most, Aerys had placed caches of wildfire beneath King's Landing, under the Sept of Baelor, the Guildhall of the Alchemists, even the Red Keep itself. If his enemies took the city, Aerys intended to burn them all, turn King's Landing into a flaming tomb rather than surrender. Now, convinced of Tywin's betrayal, Aerys chose devastation. He commanded his pyromancer, Wisdom Rossart, now his ersatz hand, to ready the wildfire pots. Green wildfire flickered in the dim halls as Rossart moved to obey, terror and zeal in his eyes. At the same time, Aerys turned to his Kingsguard, specifically to Sir Jaime Lannister, Tywin's own son, who stood at the foot of the Iron Throne. "Bring me your father's head," Aerys hissed to Jaime. The Kingsguard knight stiffened. Here it was, the moment he had dreaded. Jaime was only 17, freshly raised to the White Cloak, and now the king he swore to protect was ordering him to commit treason against his own. Blood. Jaime backed away in disbelief as Aerys repeated the command. Tywin's forces were moments from reaching the throne room doors, and Aerys was preparing to unleash hellfire upon the entire city. Jaime Lannister made his choice in an instant. As Rossart hurried out to signal the other pyromancers to ignite the wildfire, Jaime drew his sword. He caught Rossart at the door and ran him through from behind, slaying the pyromancer before the deadly order could be carried out. King Aerys screamed in fury and shock at the sight of his hand collapsing in a pool of green-tinged blood. The Mad King turned to flee, perhaps intending to ignite the wildfire himself, but Jaime was faster. With a single thrust, Jaime Lannister drove his sword into King Aerys' back, then pulled it free and slashed the king's throat. The last of the Targaryen kings by the line of Aegon the Conqueror gurgled and died on the floor of his own throne room, blood spilling over the gleaming tiles. When Lord Tywin's men finally burst into the throne room, they found a scene of utter carnage. The Mad King fallen at the base of the Iron Throne, and Jaime seated on the steps of the throne, sword red with the blood of his king. The young Lannister had prevented the destruction of the capital, but at the cost of forever branding himself a Kingslayer. Tywin himself strode in and paused, taking in the tableau. Aerys dead, Jaime standing grim and defiant amid the Kingsguard corpses, who had tried to protect the king. Tywin's gamble had succeeded in a way. King Aerys was removed from power, though not by his own hand. Still, the Lannisters had effectively taken control of King's Landing, if only for a short time. Tywin moved swiftly to secure the Red Keep. He had the remaining pyromancers hunted down. Jaime himself personally killed the others involved in the wildfire plot in the following days, ensuring the city's safety. Meanwhile, Tywin's troops rounded up any lingering pockets of resistance. Crucially, Queen Rhaella, Aerys' wife, and Prince Viserys were found and put under guard for their own protection. Princess Elia Martell and her 2 young children by Rhaegar, Princess Rhaenys, just a little girl, and infant Prince Aegon were also secured. In this timeline, Tywin did not harm Elia or the children. Those horrors that occurred in the sack of King's Landing in another world never came to pass, because Tywin knew these royals were now valuable assets for bargaining with Prince Rhaegar. In the streets, there was some looting and bloodshed inevitable whenever troops enter a city, but it was not the wholesale sack attack of King's Landing that might have been, since the Lannisters expected Rhaegar's arrival imminently and wanted to show themselves as friends, not foes. Still, many in the city saw Lannister men-at-arms on the walls and wondered if the lions had saved them or conquered them. Amidst this tense occupation, Prince Rhaegar arrived at King's Landing 2 days after the Trident. He rode at the head of a column of loyalist troops, Crownlanders, and Dornishmen who had marched hard for the capital. With him were leading nobles like Prince Doran Martell of Dorne, who had come north upon hearing of his uncle Luwin's death, and Elias Jeopardy, and Barristan Selmy, badly wounded but refusing to rest until he saw the prince on the throne. Also present under guard was Lord Eddard Stark, brought along from the battlefield as a captive to prevent any renewed northern resistance. Ned was still wan with grief and anger, but he held his head high despite the manacles. He wanted to reach King's Landing for his own reasons. His young sister Lyanna was reportedly being held somewhere far to the south, and he was desperate to know her fate. Rhaegar's war host found the city gates open, and Lannister banners flying from the ramparts. A wary standoff ensued at the gates until Lord Tywin himself emerged to greet Rhaegar with a deep bow. Tywin presented the bodies of King Aerys and Rossart as evidence of thwarting the wildfire plot. He declared that he had acted only to protect the city, for your grace, King Rhaegar. Rhaegar's violet eyes swept over the scene. He saw his father's pale corpse, borne on a litter, and Jaime standing off to the side. Blood still splashed on his white cloak. Small folk and nobles alike looked on in anticipation. Would Rhaegar embrace the Lannisters as saviors, or name them traitors? After a long, heavy pause, Rhaegar nodded to Lord Tywin. The prince-turned-king kept his composure, but those close noticed grief in his expression, grief for his slain father, mad though Aerys had been. Rhaegar thanked Tywin for preventing the destruction of King's Landing. At the same time, he could not openly praise Jaime's deed. Regicide remained a crime in the eyes of many. Nonetheless, Rhaegar walked up to Sir Jaime Lannister in front of the assembled court. The two men regarded each other, the young Kingsguard with conflicted, haunted eyes, and the new king with a stern but not unkind gaze. Rhaegar said quietly, "For Jaime alone, you saved them, my wife, my children, the whole city. For that, I thank you." Jaime's shoulders eased slightly in relief. The realm would not know the full truth of Jaime's heroism for years, but Rhaegar understood it well. He decreed that Ser Jaime would remain in the Kingsguard and retain his white cloak. Yet outside the Red Keep's walls, word was already spreading of the Kingslayer, a name that would shadow Jaime despite the king's acceptance. To the lords of Westeros, oath-breaking was anathema, no matter the cause. Jaime Lannister would find admiration in some corners for saving the capital, but among the common folk and many nobles, he was henceforth the Kingslayer, the oathbreaker, whispered about with suspicion. Rhaegar knew this stigma was the price Jaime paid, and perhaps Jaime himself preferred it over revealing Aerys' monstrous last order. With King Aerys dead and the capital secured, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen was now King Rhaegar I. The remaining lords, paramount, gathered or sent envoys to King's Landing to bend the knee. The War of the Usurper, as the Loyalists called it, had failed. The Targaryen dynasty survived, but King Rhaegar's ascension came at a tremendous cost in lives and goodwill. Many great houses had fought against him, and their surviving lords now faced an uncertain future under the very regime they tried to overthrow. King Rhaegar's first challenge was to restore unity in a realm fractured by rebellion. He convened a great council in the Red Keep's throne room within days of taking the throne. The atmosphere was tense as defeated rebels and victorious loyalists assembled under the same roof. On the side of the Iron Throne stood Lord Tywin Lannister, returned to his old role as Hand of the King. At least provisionally, Rhaegar needed Tywin's political acumen and the support of the Westerlands. Beside Tywin stood his daughter, Cersei Lannister, a golden-haired beauty with keen green eyes, now watching the new king with undisguised interest. Near them clustered the other victors. Prince Doran Martell, representing Dorne, somber over the loss of his uncle Luwin, but relieved his sister Princess Elia was safe and still queen. Mace Tyrell of the Reach, preening at his realm's loyalty and subtly angling for credit in the victory. and the remaining Kingsguard knights, including the legendary Sir Barristan Selmy, his armor dented and bandaged wounds visible, yet standing tall. Before the throne knelt the defeated Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell, head bowed but unbroken, Lord Jon Arryn of the Eyrie, proud despite his years, grieving the loss of so many friends, and Hoster Tully of Riverrun, wounded in the leg and leaning on a cane as he knelt. His daughter Catelyn, Ned's wife, stood in the gallery wringing her hands. Alongside them were other rebels who had survived Lord Robert Baratheon's younger brothers. For instance, Stannis Baratheon had endured the siege of Storm's End and only yielded after word of Robert's death reached him. Now Stannis came from the Stormlands under safe conduct. Gaunt and hollow-eyed from hunger during the siege, Stannis knelt stiffly. Behind him stood Renly Baratheon, a boy of barely 8, who looked bewildered by all the formality. The lords of the North, Vale, and Riverlands had mostly lost men and morale. They followed their liege lords in bending the knee. Everyone expected punishments or pardons to be announced. Westeros held its breath. Would the new Targaryen king be vengeful or forgiving? Rhaegar rose from the Iron Throne and addressed the hall. He spoke of the devastation wrought by the War of Fathers who would never return home. Fields and villages burned, the blood that now stained the realm. He said he wanted no more war. The realm needs healing, not further wounds, King Rhaegar proclaimed in a clear, earnest voice. Many in the hall noted that he pointedly did not blame the rebels entirely. He even acknowledged the crown's faults. He did not excuse their treason, but he expressed sorrow at the events that had led to this. It was as close to an apology as a victorious king might give. Then came judgment. To the astonishment of some, Rhaegar showed clemency. He pardoned the rebel leaders with conditions. Eddard Stark, whose father and brother had been murdered by Aerys, was forgiven his rebellion and confirmed as Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North. However, as a condition of his pardon, Ned was required to swear his personal loyalty to House Targaryen on bent knee before the court. Ned did so without flourish. He knelt and swore to honor King Rhaegar's peace, though his voice was cold and distant. He would keep his word. The honor of the Starks demanded no less, but everyone could see the reservations in Lord Stark's gray eyes. This was a man bending the knee out of necessity, not love. Rhaegar, in turn, promised to protect the North as its rightful king. The king even returned to Ned the charred remains of Lord Rickard and Brandon Stark, which Aerys had callously kept. It was a small gesture of respect to ease the Stark family's pain. Ned Stark accepted with a quiet nod, tears in his eyes, as he finally could lay his kin to rest in Winterfell's crypts. Jon Arryn was likewise spared. Rhaegar recognized the old Falcon of the Vale had only acted to protect his wards. Given Jon's age and lack of heirs, Rhaegar chose not to punish him beyond a fine and a pledge. The Arryns would continue to rule the Vale, though the king asked that Jon Arryn's stepson, young Robert Arryn, not yet born in 283, but to be born later to Jon and his wife Lysa Tully, be fostered at King's Landing when he reached suitable age, a gentle way to ensure the Arryns' continued loyalty in the future. Jon Arryn agreed to the principle, relieved that his line would survive at all. Hoster Tully also received mercy. The Riverlands had suffered deeply during the war. Rhaegar confirmed House Tully's lordship over the Trident. Lord Hoster, in gratitude, swore to uphold King Rhaegar's peace. To bind the Riverlands closer, Rhaegar hinted that in time, perhaps a marriage could be arranged between the royal family and the Riverlands. Hoster's only son Edmure Tully was a bachelor, though the suggestion of wedding a Targaryen princess to the likes of jovial Edmure raised some eyebrows at court. It was left as a future possibility. The Baratheon brothers posed a thorny issue. Robert, the rebel figurehead, was dead lying in state in the Great Sept of Baelor until his burial. Rhaegar saw little to gain in brutalizing Robert's kin, who were young and had simply followed their brother, so he opted for lenience once more. Stannis Baratheon was released from custody and allowed to inherit his brother's title as Lord of Storm's End and Lord Paramount of the Stormlands. Robert left no legitimate issue. This decision surprised some. Stannis had fought fiercely against Aerys and Rhaegar, holding Storm's End against the Tyrell siege for almost a year. Many thought Rhaegar might strip the Baratheons of their ancestral seat as punishment, but King Rhaegar's wisdom was that loyalty earned is stronger than fear. By showing trust in Stannis, he hoped to make Stannis loyal in turn. Publicly, Rhaegar declared, House Baratheon was among the greatest of Aegon the Conqueror's allies, and the blood of the dragon's kin runs in their veins. Let that alliance be renewed, not broken. Stannis swore his fealty with clenched teeth. The hard-edged, dutiful man accepted the crown's pardon. Though inwardly he simmered, he would keep his oaths, but Rhaegar was the man whose actions, as Stannis saw it, had led to his beloved brother Robert's death. Stannis' personal feelings were buried deep beneath his rigid sense of duty. He would rule the Stormlands for King Rhaegar, but the friendship once shared between Storm's End and the crown was gone, perhaps forever. As for young Renly Baratheon, he was too young to have participated in war. Rhaegar treated him kindly, even inviting Renly to foster at court as a companion to Prince Aegon when older. This was a gracious gesture. Renly would be raised alongside Rhaegar's own son, essentially as a ward of the crown, and a soft hostage to ensure Stormlander loyalty. Stannis agreed to let Renly go when the time came, though Renly himself pouted at the idea of leaving his home. There were other scores to settle. Lords who remained loyal like the Tyrells, Redwyne Fleet, the Martells were rewarded with royal favor. Rhaegar formally thanked Lord Mace Tyrell for his stalwart loyalty during the Siege of Storm's End. Behind closed doors, some joked that it was Randyll Tarly who had defeated Robert at Ashford, while Mace took undeserved credit, but the king diplomatically praised Mace all the same. The Tyrells kept their position and gained influence at court. Doran Martell of Dorne received a royal pardon for any Dornish spearmen who might have fought on the Trident against the rebels. Some Northerners still grumbled about Dornishmen killing their friends. Rhaegar acknowledged Prince Luwin Martell's valor and mourned his passing. To honor Luwin and appease Dorne's pride, Rhaegar promised to erect a statue of Prince Luwin in King's Landing as one of the war's heroes. This mollified Doran Martell somewhat. More importantly, Rhaegar's continued marriage to Queen Elia Martell and the survival of their children ensured Dorne's tight bond to the Iron Throne. The Martells had shed blood for Rhaegar. Their status in the new regime was elevated. Elia retained her title as queen and stood beside Rhaegar during the council, a quiet but dignified figure. Yet Elias' eyes betrayed strain the war had been started over Lyanna Stark, her husband's infidelity. Though she was too gracious to mention it, Elia Martell carried the emotional scars of that betrayal. Still, the pragmatic alliance between Targaryen and Martell held strong. The realm needed that unity. What of the Lannisters? Tywin had maneuvered brilliantly and delivered King's Landing to Rhaegar, albeit not without controversy. Rhaegar confirmed Tywin as Hand of the King, a role Tywin had excelled at for decades before. The realm needed Tywin's ruthless efficiency to rebuild. This also served to check Tywin's ambitions better to have the Lion close, where Rhaegar could keep an eye on him than ruling the West in semi-independence and harboring resentment. Many at court noted that Tywin wasted no time proposing closer ties between the Iron Throne and Casterly Rock. The Proud Lord offered Lady Cersei's hand in marriage, once offered to Rhaegar years ago, perhaps now to Rhaegar's younger brother, Prince Viserys, or even in the future for little Prince Aegon. Rhaegar did not commit to any such match immediately. Viserys was a boy of 6, and Cersei a grown woman of 17. The notion of betrothing the prince to someone so much older was delicate. Still, Rhaegar gave polite but non-committal answers to Tywin. He knew Tywin's loyalty was transactional. The Hand would expect his due reward in influence and power. For now, Rhaegar granted Tywin and House Lannister great honors for their role in ending the war, but privately, the new king remained cautious. Tywin's brutal sacking instincts had nearly been unleashed. Only Jaime's surprising intervention had saved the city from ruin. Rhaegar kept Grand Maester Pycelle in office, despite Pycelle's blatant Lannister allegiance, to avoid antagonizing Tywin early. Varys, the Master of Whisperers, also remained. His little birds proved useful in sniffing out any lingering plots, and Rhaegar valued information. In sum, King Rhaegar chose reconciliation over retribution. He issued a general amnesty for all common fighters on the rebel side, no executions, no attainders stripping families of lands, so long as oaths of fealty were renewed. This was almost unheard of mercy after a civil war. Some of Rhaegar's loyal allies were displeased, feeling the rebels got off too lightly, but Rhaegar's aim was to prevent future rebellions by removing the grievances that could fuel them. Publicly, he framed it as fulfilling the promise his great ancestor made when Westeros first was conquered. I want not to burn the country with dragon fire, but to bind it in peace. In private, Rhaegar also knew that his own actions, the affair with Lyanna, had partly provoked the war it weighed on him. Showing humanity to the vanquished was, in a way, atonement. That said, King Rhaegar wasn't blindly lenient. He took precautions to secure his rule. He quietly arranged that some sons of the former rebels be brought to court as wards, ensuring their families' good behavior. For instance, when they came of age, Robb Stark, Ned's infant heir, would be welcomed to foster at King's Landing or Dragonstone, alongside royal children. Lord Stark bristled at the thought of his son effectively a hostage, but couched as an honor, he could hardly refuse without giving offense. Likewise, King Rhaegar's council discussed betrothals to link houses, perhaps a marriage between the next generation of Targaryens and Starks, or Arryns, or Tullys. One intriguing idea was floated by Varys. Princess Daenerys, Rhaegar's newborn sister, could be betrothed to one of the Sons of the North, or Vale. Daenerys had been born after the war, a babe with silvery hair and violet eyes, a symbol that the Targaryen line continued. Another idea from Tywin was to betroth Princess Rhaenys, Rhaegar's young daughter, to a highborn son of a former rebel house when she came of age. Such plans were left for the future, but the seeds were planted. To maintain order, royal garrisons were installed in key castles that had been flashpoints. The garrison at King's Landing was rebuilt with soldiers loyal to the crown, many Dornish and Crownlanders, as the city watch had proven fickle. Dragonstone's defense was increased as well. That island stronghold would remain in Targaryen hands. Rhaegar's heir Prince Aegon was named Prince of Dragonstone, the traditional title. The North and Vale, being distant, were largely left to self-govern under their lords, but ravens flew regularly from the Red Keep to Winterfell and the Eyrie, reminding them they were not forgotten by the Iron Throne. Slowly, a fragile peace settled over Westeros. The rebellion was officially over. By the end of 283 AC, King Rhaegar declared the new era of the Dragon's Peace. He held a great feast in King's Landing to celebrate the end of the war and the birth of his sister Daenerys. The High Lords drank and laughed in the torchlit halls of the Red Keep, but tension simmered under the surface. Old enemies now had to make merry side by side. There were awkward moments. At the feast, young Lord Greatjon Umber of the North nearly came to blows with a Dornish lord over a jest about dead fish in the Trident, clearly a reference to Northmen slain there. Greatjon only stopped when Ned Stark glared him into silence. Aerys Oakheart of the Kingsguard deftly intervened to change the subject. Meanwhile, Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne and brother to Ilya, fixed lethal stares on certain guests. Oberyn had come to King's Landing to escort his sister Ilya and her children back safely to Dorne for a time of rest. He bore no love for the former rebels. He pointedly asked Jon Arryn during the feast if the ale was to his taste, since it wasn't poisoned like his family's weapons were rumored to be. Jon Arryn politely ignored the provocation. The underlying resentments on all sides were palpable. King Rhaegar could declare peace, but making men truly forget their grievances was another challenge entirely. While the political reconciliation proceeded in King's Landing, a far more personal drama was unfolding hundreds of leagues to the south. At the Tower of Joy, in the Red Mountains of Dorne, Lyanna Stark was fighting for her life. This forlorn tower was where Rhaegar had kept Lyanna safe during the war. A small garrison of the Kingsguard watched over her. Sir Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Oswell Went, and the famed Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. Rhaegar had named the place Tower of Joy when he brought Lyanna there in hopes it would be a sanctuary for their love, but after nearly a year confined, with war raging beyond her door, it felt more like a prison to Lyanna, and now, Lyanna was in childbirth, attended only by a few loyal servants and the Kingsguard knights outside. The baby Rhaegar and Lyanna's son came early amid blood and grief. Lyanna was burning with fever after a difficult labor. Back in King's Landing, as soon as King Rhaegar had stabilized the realm's affairs enough to travel, he set out for Dorne to reach Lyanna. Rhaegar knew by now that Lyanna had given birth to their child. Word had reached him through a raven from the tower. Arthur Dayne had sent a discreet message once the baby was born, urging Rhaegar to come quickly. Rhaegar departed the capital with a small escort. Unexpectedly, he was joined by Lord Eddard Stark. Ned had learned from Rhaegar, or perhaps from Howland Reed, his close friend who survived the Trident and had heard whispers, that Lyanna was very likely at a tower in the Red Mountains. Despite everything, Rhaegar did not deny Ned the chance to go to his sister. Maybe the king hoped this gesture would earn Ned's trust. Maybe he simply felt it was right. So, an unlikely pair, the king and the lord he defeated, rode south in haste. Along with them rode Sir Arthur Dayne's sister, Lady Ashara Dayne, who had been at court and anxiously yearned for news of her brother and the situation at the tower. Arthur Dayne was Rhaegar's dear friend. Ashara and Ned Stark also had a known friendly acquaintance, some said a mutual attraction, from before the war. Now all were united by concern for Lyanna and the newborn child. After hard riding, they approached the Tower of Joy at dusk. The tall, pale tower stood isolated against the Red Mountains, a few weirwood trees dotting the area. As Rhaegar and Ned's party neared, the three white-cloaked Kingsguard emerged, hands on their sword hilts. For a moment, tension crackled. These were the men who had remained loyal to Aerys and Rhaegar, and they faced Ned Stark, who had fought their king. But seeing Prince now King Rhaegar among the riders, Sir Arthur Dayne broke into a relieved smile. He hailed his friend. "Your Grace," Dayne said, warmly, bending the knee. Hightower and Went followed suit, saluting Rhaegar as their king. Rhaegar dismounted swiftly. "Where is Lyanna?" he asked, voice tight with worry. Arthur's smile faded. "Inside, my lord. She's very weak. The child is alive, a boy." Rhaegar nodded, eyes shining with emotion. Ned Stark was already rushing forward, past the Kingsguard, without even a word. Sir Gerald Hightower bristled at the discourtesy, but Rhaegar held up a hand. "Let him go. Has her brother." Ned burst through the tower door and took the steps two at a time. In a modest bedchamber on the upper floor, Lyanna Stark lay in a bed soaked with blood. Her once bright blue eyes were dull with fever, her skin pale as winter's first frost. Yet she managed a faint smile when she saw Ned appear at her bedside. "Ned," she whispered. Ned choked back a sob at the sight of his little sister, so frail and broken. He knelt and took her hand, which was limp and burning hot. "I am here, Lyanna. I am here." Behind Ned, King Rhaegar entered quietly, his face stricken. For a moment, Lyanna's eyes hardened at the sight of him, the man she had loved, but also the man whose quest for destiny had wrought all this suffering. Still, when Rhaegar stepped forward, Lyanna did not turn away. In his arms, he carried a swaddled infant boy, with a tuft of dark hair, their son, born in the tower. A wet nurse hovered nearby, nervous and reverent. She had handed the baby to Rhaegar just outside the room. Ned looked from Lyanna to the baby in Rhaegar's arms, realization dawning. "This is," he began. Lyanna nodded weakly. "My son," she whispered. Ned felt a storm of conflicted feelings, relief that Lyanna had not been harmed by Rhaegar, as he once feared, astonishment that she bore a child, sorrow that this innocent babe was born of such strife. Rhaegar approached Lyanna's side and gently placed the baby boy in her arms. The infant fussed softly, but calmed, as Lyanna held him against her chest. Rhaegar knelt on Lyanna's other side, eyes wet. "Lyanna, I'm so sorry," he murmured. There were no easy words for this moment. Love and grief and guilt hung thick in that small room. Lyanna managed to stroke the baby's cheek. "His name," she began, voice trembling. Rhaegar and Ned leaned in. In a halting voice, Lyanna revealed she and Rhaegar had privately thought of a Targaryen name for the child. "He is Aegon Targaryen," she breathed. Ned stiffened. Aegon was also the name of Rhaegar's son, with Elia. It struck him as cruel folly to name this baby the same, as if supplanting Elia's boy. Rhaegar closed his eyes at Lyanna's choice, perhaps understanding the symbolism. In Rhaegar's mind, this child born of ice and fire was the prince that was promised, the one to fulfill ancient prophecy. He already had a son, Aegon, but prophecy had driven Rhaegar to believe a third child was needed, perhaps why he had given this baby the same storied name, Aegon, signifying a conqueror reborn. However, Ned interjected. Gently, "Lyanna maybe, for his safety." A different name, he couldn't imagine how they'd hide the babe if he carried such an unmistakably royal name. Lyanna's fevered eyes flickered to her brother. She understood. "Jon," she whispered then, a small smile forming. "Call him Jon, after Jon Arryn, who raised us all." Jon was a common enough name, unlikely to raise suspicions. Ned nodded firmly. "Jon, yes." Rhaegar bowed his head in assent. In public, the child could not be Aegon, son of Rhaegar, without inciting fury from the Martells and great lords. Jon would be his cloak. Tears shone in Lyanna's eyes. She knew her time was short. With what strength remained, Lyanna drew Ned close. "Promise me, Ned," she gasped, lips barely moving. Ned squeezed her hand, heartbreaking. "You have to protect him. Promise me you'll protect Jon. Don't let Robert's friends or the Lannisters, don't let them harm my boy." Ned's throat tightened. His sister was asking him to guard the child, who, in Robert Baratheon's eyes, would be the product of Rhaegar's abduction. A child Robert would have sought to kill without mercy, had Robert lived. Even now, many in the realm would see this boy as a threat to the peace or a scandal to be erased. Ned understood. "I promise, Lyanna," he said, voice cracking. "I'll protect him. I'll take care of him. On my honor, you have my word." Satisfied, Lyanna managed the faintest sigh of relief. She turned her gaze to Rhaegar. The tension between them was heavy with unspoken regret. "Will you keep your promise, too?" Lyanna asked Rhaegar softly. It was not clear what promise she meant. Perhaps the promises whispered in the Isle of Faces when they ran off together, or perhaps simply the promise to be a good king and keep their sons safe. Rhaegar's eyes brimmed. He placed a hand over Lyanna's. "I swear it, Lyanna. On my life, our son will be safe, and the realm will know peace." Lyanna Stark, the wild wolf girl of Winterfell, closed her eyes for the last time moments later. Ned let out a wounded sob, holding her hand to his forehead. Rhaegar bowed his head and wept silently, his tears falling on the baby's blanket. The promise had been sealed in Lyanna's final breaths. Ned Stark and King Rhaegar were now bound by a shared secret and a shared duty to protect little Jon Aegon, whatever his true name was, and ensure his existence did not destroy the realm. They built a cairn for Lyanna beside the tower. As dusk settled into a starry night, Ned gently brushed the dust from the stone markers, tears sliding down his cheeks. He would later carry Lyanna's bones north to rest in Winterfell's crypt, as she had always wanted, but for now, this would mark her passing. Arthur Dayne, who loved Lyanna in his own chivalrous way, as the subject of a prince's love, shed tears openly too. He placed his greatsword Dawn, its pale blade shimmering, upright in the earth by the cairn, as a gesture of honor for Lyanna's memory. He retrieved it again, only after the memorial. The sword would remain with House Dayne, but that moment symbolized farewell. Outside, Ashara Dayne comforted Ned as he stumbled from the tower, with grief etched on his face. She and Ned exchanged few words. None were needed. Ashara took in the sight of the infant in Ned's arms, and the devastated look in Rhaegar's eyes as he emerged behind Ned. In that instant, Ashara no doubt realized whose child that was, and why secrecy was paramount. The Daynes were ever loyal to Rhaegar, and Ashara vowed silently to keep the confidence. Under cover of darkness, they agreed on what to do with the baby boy. King Rhaegar knew he could not openly acknowledge Lyanna's child. His wife Elia did not yet know of the baby's existence. One shudders to imagine that difficult conversation Rhaegar would have to confess eventually, and even if Elia could be persuaded to accept it, the rest of Westeros would not. The boy would be seen as a threat to the line of succession, to Elaya's son Aegon, and a living insult to Dorna's princess. If one whisper reached Doran Martell that Rhaegar had a son with another woman, Dorna's loyalty could turn to fury. Not to mention other lords. If the boy were acknowledged, some might perversely rally around him as a figurehead to oppose Rhaegar, or to claim the throne through Lyanna's Stark blood and Targaryen blood combined. The safer course was to hide the child's identity completely. Ned Stark, true to his word, offered to take the baby with him back to Winterfell and raise him as his own. "People will believe he's my bastard," Ned said bitterly. The Honorable Lord Stark was effectively sacrificing his own honor to protect his sister's child, a heavy burden, but one he accepted out of love. Rhaegar clasped Ned's shoulder. "You would do this for him? For us?" he asked quietly. Ned's jaw tightened. "For Lyanna," he replied simply. That was enough. They agreed. Jon Snow would be presented in the north as Ned's illegitimate son, born of some common girl during the war. No one in Dorne or King's Landing would question that. The north might gossip it was out of character for the Honorable Ned Stark to sire a bastard, but they would accept the story. Rhaegar made Ned swear once more, by the old gods and the new, never to reveal the boy's parentage. Only a handful of people knew the truth now. Rhaegar, Ned, Howland Reed, who had come south with Ned's party, and the Kingsguard who were present. Sir Arthur Dane, upon parting with Rhaegar, knelt and vowed he would guard the secret with his life. Arthur likely guessed that prophecy and destiny swirled around this boy. His friend Rhaegar had often confided in him about such matters. Sir Oswell Went and Sir Gerald Hightower likewise swore to remain silent. With that, Ned Stark departed for the north with baby Jon in his arms, bereft of his sister, but determined to keep her son safe. King Rhaegar watched Ned ride off, knowing a piece of his heart was leaving with that infant. This was the cost of victory. Rhaegar had saved his crown, but lost his love and could not openly claim his own son. It was a bitter, tragic compromise, one that would haunt both men for years to come. They tore down the Tower of Joy shortly after, stone by stone. It was Arthur Dane's idea to leave no physical monument to what transpired there. The stones were used to build cairns for the Northmen who had died, for in another timeline, Ned Stark arrived with 6 companions and fought the Kingsguard. In this timeline, there had been no fight at the tower, but some of Ned's men from earlier skirmishes were given resting places here. The tower where Rhaegar and Lyanna had shared a brief, bright moment of happiness was gone, as if it had never existed. Only the promises made beneath its roof remained, unspoken and heavy. When Ned Stark returned to Winterfell months later, he brought with him baby Jon, presented to the world as his bastard son by an unknown mother. Catelyn Stark was stunned and heartbroken that Ned would betray their marriage vows. She had given birth to their own son, Robb, barely a few months prior, and now her husband returned from war with another woman's child in arms. Ned, bound by his vow, gave no explanation, saying only the boy's name was Jon Snow, and he would be raised as part of his household. Catelyn wept that night in their bedchamber, feeling wounded by this evidence of Ned's unfaithfulness during the war. Ned could not comfort her with the truth. He simply endured her pain and his own, knowing it was the price of keeping Lyanna's son safe. Thus, the innocent Jon Snow grew up never knowing he was heir to 2 great houses. He would be just another child of Winterfell, albeit one often met with mistrust or scorn by some. Lady Catelyn in particular found it hard to love the boy who reminded her of Ned's supposed betrayal. Ned, for his part, kept his promise. He treated Jon as his own blood, seeing in the boy the face of his lost sister. Ned's demeanor grew more solemn and stern after the war. The weight of secrets and regrets aged him beyond his years. Northerners noticed a new distance in their lord. He had seen too much heartbreak. In King's Landing, King Rhaegar resumed his royal duties with a stoic countenance. None could guess the turmoil in his heart. He had to explain to Queen Elia why he left urgently for Dorne and returned solemn and grief-stricken. It's said that one night, Elia confronted Rhaegar privately. She was intelligent and had likely heard enough whispers to piece together that Lyanna Stark died in Dorne around the same time Rhaegar traveled there. Perhaps Elia guessed a child was born as well. If so, it's not recorded in histories, but some believe Elia, in her gentle wisdom, chose not to dig up that secret. She already had 2 children to protect, and knowing would only put them and Dorne in peril. So Elia and Rhaegar reached a fragile understanding. They resumed their public life as king and queen, but something fundamental had changed. Rhaegar poured affection on his wife and their children out of duty and genuine care. He did love Elia in his own way, though not with the fiery passion he'd felt for Lyanna. He tried to make amends for the hurt he'd caused. Elia remained gracious, advocating for peaceful reconciliation in council meetings and tempering any vengeful impulses from her Dornish kin. Yet late at night, Rhaegar was often restless. He would walk the ramparts of the Red Keep alone, gazing north toward distant stars, wondering about the son he'd exiled for the sake of the realm. He would remember Lyanna's laughter at the tourney of Harrenhal, the crown of blue winter roses he placed in her lap, and the promise he made as she died. Those memories fueled Rhaegar's resolve to be a just ruler. He felt he owed it to Lyanna's memory to build a better realm than the one his father left. The early years of Rhaegar's reign were devoted to rebuilding and reforming. The 7 kingdoms had been ravaged by rebellion and needed strong yet careful leadership to recover. Rhaegar proved to be a very different king from his father. Where Aerys was erratic and cruel, Rhaegar was measured, thoughtful, and earnest. His first royal decree was to disband the remnants of the Pyromancers Guild from the Red Keep, ensuring no wildfire would ever again threaten the capital. He publicly condemned the madness of his father's final days, which helped placate those who still feared Targaryen insanity. By denouncing Aerys' worst actions, such as the murder of Rickard and Brandon Stark, Rhaegar signaled a new start for Targaryen rule. This earned cautious approval from commoners and lords alike. Rhaegar then turned to the small folk's plight. The war had left many villages in ashes, especially in the Riverlands, where armies had marched back and forth. Under Tywin's able administration as Hand, the crown set aside funds to rebuild roads, holdfasts, and septs that were destroyed. Harvests had been poor in 282-283 due to armies requisitioning food. In 284, Rhaegar ordered royal granaries opened to feed famine-stricken areas. Taxes on the North and Riverlands were temporarily reduced. As a gesture of goodwill, the rebels might have expected punishment, but instead they saw some relief. Gold from the royal treasury and substantial loans from the Iron Bank, negotiated by Master of Coin Lord Baelish, more on him soon, was used to prop up economies shattered by war. These measures gradually won over many small folk who had initially cheered for Robert's cause. They saw that life under King Rhaegar was not the misery they'd known under the Mad King. At court, Rhaegar cultivated an image of a philosopher king. He often summoned maesters, singers, and septons for learned conversation. The small folk told tales of the new king's love of music indeed. Rhaegar would sometimes play his silver harp and sing softly at court gatherings, reviving the tradition of noble Westerosi music which had languished under Eris. This touch of culture made him popular in Old Town and among the Citadel's archmasters, who appreciated a king who valued knowledge. The common people of King's Landing even composed a song about him, remembering how he sang at Harrenhal. They called him the Dragon Prince in one verse and the King of Songs in another. Such praise probably embarrassed Rhaegar, but he understood the value of good PR. While Robert Baratheon had been loved by small folk as a heroic warrior, Rhaegar gradually won their respect as a just and enlightened king. Rhaegar's small council balanced former rebels and loyalists. Tywin Lannister remained Hand, bringing stability and fearsome efficiency. The Master of Ships was given to Stannis Baratheon. In a canny move, Rhaegar decided to include Stannis in the small council to fully integrate this once rebel into the royal government. Stannis, though brusque and uncharismatic, threw himself into the work of rebuilding the royal fleet, nearly destroyed during the war and the Greyjoy attacks that would come, and fortifying ports. The Master of Law's position went to Jon Arryn after a couple of years, when Tywin suggested easing up on his duties and Jon's health was still good. Jon's presence reassured the Vale and Riverlords that they had a voice. Varys kept his role as Master of Whisperers, continuing to ferret out any brewing conspiracies, though in truth, with a Targaryen restored and content lords, the realm was relatively quiet for now. The Master of Coin Post saw an unlikely appointment. Pater Baelish, a minor noble from the Fingers in the Vale, found favor initially through Lysa Arryn's recommendation to her husband Jon Arryn. Under Robert's rule, in another timeline, Littlefinger managed finances skillfully. In this timeline, Peter's opportunity came a bit later, around 286 AC. As the crown was managing its large debts from reconstruction, Littlefinger's clever accounting caught King Rhaegar's attention. Though Lord Tywin was wary of promoting a lowborn upstart, Rhaegar gave Peter charge of some customs collections to test him. Peter excelled, filling the crown's coffers and greasing palms strategically. By 288 AC, Peter Littlefinger Baelish was Master of Coin. His rise indicated that King Rhaegar valued talent over birth in certain cases, which was a refreshing change at court. Of course, those who knew Peter's cunning worried what plots such a man might weave with power, but for the time being, Littlefinger behaved, enriching the realm while furtively advancing his own ambitions in the shadows. One might note, with Jon Arryn never serving as Robert's hand in this reality, since Robert never took the throne, Littlefinger never got the exact same early boost, but he found his way in regardless, adaptable as ever. A key aspect of Rhaegar's rule was resolving lingering threats from the war. One came from the Iron Islands. In 289 AC, just 6 years after the rebellion, Balon Greyjoy declared himself King of the Iron Islands, and launched a rebellion. Under King Robert's timeline, this happened as well. Balon saw Robert's regime as war-weary, and seized the chance for Ironborn independence. In Rhaegar's timeline, Balon's logic was similar. He believed the Targaryen regime was still fragile. Its attention turned inward to healing the mainland, and that the Ironborn could raid freely and even throw off the rule of the Iron Throne. So, Balon sent his longships to harry the western coasts. The Greyjoy Rebellion began with the Iron Fleet led by Balon's brother Victarion, ambushing the royal fleet at Fair Isle. The Ironborn also launched daring raids on the Westerlands, and reached coasts they burnt the Lannister port of Lannisport, setting much of the Lannister fleet aflame at anchor, and sacked villages along the Mander. News of these attacks enraged Lord Tywin and alarmed King Rhaegar. The king called his banners once more. This time, all the lords of Westeros responded to their sovereign's call, eager to prove their loyalty, and in the case of former rebels, to wash away any remaining suspicion on them by fighting for the crown. Stannis Baratheon, as Master of Ships and Lord of Storm's End, was tasked with crushing the Iron Fleet. With King Rhaegar's backing, Stannis had rebuilt and expanded the Royal Navy over the past years. He now gathered a formidable armada, including ships from the Redwyne fleet of the Reach and Lannister warships that survived or were newly built after Lannisport's burning. In a grand sea battle off the coast of Fair Isle, Stannis met Victarion Greyjoy in combat. The battle was brutal. Ironborn longships swarmed cunningly, but Stannis had larger, better-armed war galleys. Thanks to excellent strategy and a bit of wildfire launched by Alchemist Guild catapults on the Redwyne ships, the royal fleet trapped and annihilated the Iron Fleet. The victory was decisive. Victarion's prized warship, the Iron Victory, was set aflame and sent to the bottom of the sea. Stannis proved his mettle that day, and his exploits were lauded in King's Landing. Even King Rhaegar, who seldom showed overt favoritism, praised Stannis' unyielding loyalty and skill. This went a long way toward healing any remaining rift between Storm's End and the Iron Throne. Simultaneously, a combined land force assaulted the Iron Islands themselves. King Rhaegar decided to lead this host personally. He wanted to demonstrate that the Iron Throne would not tolerate any challenge, and perhaps he also sought a controlled battleground to prove himself as a warrior king to those who only remembered him from the Trident. The army included Ned Stark with Northmen. The Greyjoys had made the mistake of raiding the northern coast at Sea Dragon Point, which spurred Ned to action the Ironborn, carrying off women and treasure enraged the north. Tywin Lannister bringing Westermen thirsty for revenge for Lannisport. Mace Tyrell leading Reach levies. The Redwyne fleet had already joined Stannis, but Tyrell soldiers and the warrior Randall Tarly went by land to the coast to sail to Pike, and even Prince Doran Martell sent a token force of Dornishmen to show unity. Though the Iron Islands were far, a few ships with Dornish spears arrived. Notably, Robert Baratheon was not there to lead, as in another world he was dead, so the banner of Storm's End was carried by Lord Renlys Castellan, as Stannis was at sea, but King Rhaegar and Prince Lewin Martell's successor in the Kingsguard, Sir Barristan Selmy, effectively commanded the royal host. The final showdown occurred at Pike, the Greyjoy stronghold. Rhaegar's forces converged on the islands, taking Great Week and Old Wight quickly, then besieging Pike. The Ironborn fought fiercely during the assault. Men like Sir Jorah Mormont of Bear Island distinguished themselves. Jorah was among the first over the breached walls of Pike, fighting with valor, just as he had in the other timeline. The Crown's forces eventually forced their way into the Great Keep after a daring raid led by Thoros of Myr, the Red Priest with a flaming sword, who charged through the breach. Sir Barristan Selmy was grievously wounded in the fighting, taking a spear for King Rhaegar when a group of Ironborn rushed them in an alley of the castle, but Barristan, legendary as he was, killed 4 attackers even while wounded. With blood streaming down his side, he planted the Targaryen banner atop the Greyjoy ramparts. Seeing the battle lost, Balon Greyjoy yielded. 2 of Balon's sons, Roderick and Meryn, had died in the fighting, which broke the proud lord's spirit. He descended the steps of his throne room to kneel before King Rhaegar in chains. King Rhaegar accepted Balon's surrender. The punishment was stern, but measured. Balon was allowed to remain Lord of the Iron Islands, to keep the Ironborn in line under heavy conditions. He had to give up his last surviving son, Theon Greyjoy, as a hostage to ensure his good behavior. In a decision echoing what King Robert did in another timeline, Rhaegar decreed that Theon Greyjoy would be fostered by one of the great lords of Westeros, far from the sea. Some suggested sending Theon to Casterly Rock, or the Red Keep itself, but Lord Eddard Stark stepped forward and volunteered to take the boy as his ward. Ned had distinguished himself in the Iron Islands campaign. His Northmen cut off many Ironborn retreating from Pike. Ned offered to raise Theon in Winterfell, reasoning that it might teach the boy honor, and also that the North's distance from the Iron Islands would make escape impossible. Rhaegar trusted Ned's honor and agreed. Thus, Theon Greyjoy, aged about 10, went north with Ned Stark. Theon grew up alongside the Stark children, largely oblivious to the true parentage of his foster brother Jon Snow, and serving as a second political hostage in Winterfell, along with Ned's fostering of young Jon Snow, though only Ned knew Jon was a hostage of fate rather than crown. The crushing of the Greyjoy rebellion solidified Rhaegar's rule. All the great houses had now fought with the king, not against him, forging bonds on the battlefield that transcended past grudges. Ned Stark, for instance, earned new respect from royalists for his bravery at Pike. The king's actions to include him in the campaign were seen as validation of the North's loyalty. When Rhaegar and Ned stood together on the smoking ruins of Pike, some said it was like Aegon the Conqueror and Torrhen Stark after the Field of Fire former foes turned allies. Though not exactly friends, there was a mutual esteem. Rhaegar admired Ned's steadfast integrity. Ned begrudgingly admired Rhaegar's courage and fairness in victory. They spoke politely, if not warmly. Their shared secret about Jon bound them in ways others couldn't see. After Pike, Ned even brought himself to thank Rhaegar for sparing Theon's life and trusting him with the boy, a subtle way of acknowledging that Rhaegar had kept his word to Lyanna not to harm her son or kin. Rhaegar, in turn, commended the Northmen for their ferocity in battle and ensured the Ironborn paid reparations to northern villages they'd raided. With the Iron Islands subdued, the last major threat to Rhaegar's reign was dealt with. The rest of his rule, for a time, was a golden peace. Trade flourished. The Westerland's gold mines churned again, enriching the crown, especially as Tywin ensured the crown got its proper taxation share. The Reach had bountiful harvests and fed the realm. Dorne remained peaceful, tied by blood to the Iron Throne. In fact, Princess Rhaenys, Rhaegar's daughter, was betrothed to Trystane Martell, Prince Doran's young son, in 292 AC, when Rhaenys was of age 10 and Trystane 7. This match pleased Doran greatly, further binding House Martell and Targaryen. Rhaenys would one day be Princess of Dorne, as well as a Targaryen princess, a sign of great favor to the Martells. Queen Elia approved wholeheartedly, happy to see her daughter wed to her own family. In the north, the scars of war healed more slowly. Though Ned Stark outwardly appeared loyal and dutiful, the north had its own pride. Many northerners still privately believed Robert Baratheon died a hero, and they quietly honored his memory. On cold winter nights, some of Ned's bannermen would raise a toast to the young stag who made the dragon bleed. These dissenting murmurs never grew into open rebellion. The North was spent, and Ned Stark would never condone such treason, but the sentiment lingered. It was a cold war of the heart. Lord Manderley of White Harbor still taught his children about the usurper. Robert unfavorably. White Harbor had Targaryen loyalist leanings, even during the rebellion, whereas Lord Howland Reed of the Crannogmen, who knew the truth of Lyanna's story, remained fiercely devoted to Ned and held his tongue about the past. The Boltons of the Dreadfort, ever opportunistic, quietly spread seditious whispers when they could, saying the North should never forget its humiliation under the Iron Throne. But the Boltons were closely watched by Ned and by the king's spies. King Rhaegar, for his part, did not want to give the North any fresh reason for resentment. He governed the North lightly, allowing Ned broad autonomy. Rhaegar even sent his young brother Prince Viserys to Winterfell as a guest for one summer, partly to educate the arrogant boy in the ways of the rugged North, and partly as a gesture of goodwill, a living symbol that the Targaryen prince trusted the Starks for his safety. Viserys, at around age 12 then, found Winterfell dreary and the Northerners coarse, but he did develop a healthy respect for their hardiness. Queen Rhaella, who had survived Daenerys' birth in this timeline, thanks to better Maesters in King's Landing, only to succumb to a sudden illness a few years later, had advised Rhaegar to keep Viserys humble. A stint in the north achieved that somewhat. One of the great tasks King Rhaegar set for himself was one that weighed on him since youth: the prophecy of the prince that was promised. Rhaegar was a deeply spiritual man in his own way. He had been born amidst tragedy during the tragedy at Summerhall, and grew up believing the ancient prophecy that a savior would be born of the Targaryen line to deliver the world from darkness. At first, he thought himself that hero. Later, he believed his son Aegon was. But a red comet in 284 AC, visible shortly after baby Aegon's birth and Lyanna's death, made the king brood-some, said it heralded the coming of the prince that was promised. Others whispered it was an omen of blood. Rhaegar dove into prophetic texts with the help of Archmaster Marwyn from Old Town, who visited King's Landing to consult on dragon lore, and any woods witch or seer he could subtly question. He became convinced that the promised hero was not his first son Aegon alone, but the union of ice and fire, the child of a Stark and a Targaryen, Jon, his secret son, in other words. Rhaegar kept this interpretation close to his chest. Who could he tell? Certainly not the small council. They would think him mad. Not Elia or Doran. It would only reopen wounds. The only person who might understand was perhaps Maester Aemon Targaryen, Rhaegar's great-great-uncle, who was at the Wall. In 289 AC, Rhaegar received a letter via the Night's Watch from Maester Aemon, congratulating him on securing the realm and subtly inquiring if the Song of Ice and Fire that Rhaegar once mentioned had been fulfilled. It was said that during the war, Rhaegar told Aemon via Raven that my son is the prince that was promised, and his is the Song of Ice and Fire. At the time, Rhaegar meant his son with Lyanna Jon. Rhaegar wrote back in guarded terms. He could not reveal Jon's existence, but he and Aemon corresponded in code about prophecy. Aemon urged the king to study the ancient Valyrian scrolls and lore of the last hero for clues. The true threat that concerned Rhaegar was one few in power took seriously: the White Walkers beyond the Wall. The Long Night was a half-forgotten myth to most, but Rhaegar felt in his soul that the real war would not be for a chair in King's Landing, but for the dawn of humanity. He increased the Night's Watch funding modestly, which pleased Lord Commander Jorah Mormont. He had dragonglass shipped to Castle Black, citing it as surplus from Dragonstone's obsidian mines. Most thought these moves curious, but harmless a king, indulging old legends. Ned Stark noticed, though. Ned's mind often returned to the chilling words Lyanna spoke of white shadows in her fever dreams before she died, and to Rhaegar's own fervent declaration at the Tower of Joy that there must be a fire to push back the ice. At the time, Ned did not fully grasp it, but as ravens brought reports of strange cold winds and missing rangers in the far north over the years, Ned began to share Rhaegar's concern. In 293 AC, at the Great Harvest Feast in Winterfell, which King Rhaegar attended, a royal progress took him through the north to mend relations. Ned and Rhaegar had a rare private conversation in the crypts of Winterfell by Lyanna's tomb. Surrounded by the stone likenesses of Stark kings, they spoke not as king and lord, but as two men bound by fate. Rhaegar confided his belief that a darkness was coming from the far north, something worse than any rebel or usurper. Ned, who had always been skeptical of southern tales, felt the truth in Rhaegar's voice. This was bigger than politics. Ned finally broke his silence on one point. He told Rhaegar that if ever the dead walked or winter demons came, the North would stand by the crown to fight them. "We are not friends, your grace," Ned said quietly, torchlight flickering over Lyanna's statue, "but we are allies in whatever is to come beyond the Wall. You have my word, the word of a Stark." Rhaegar, moved, clasped Ned's forearm in the manner of the North. "And you have mine, the promise of a Targaryen," he replied. In that cold crypt, the dragon and the wolf at last made peace, united by the specter of a greater enemy. By 297 AC, King Rhaegar had ruled for 15 years. The realm was prosperous. His children had grown. Prince Aegon Targaryen was a confident young man of 17, recently married to his cousin Princess Daenerys. Yes, in a grand Valyrian-style wedding to keep the Targaryen blood pure, and also to placate any who might challenge Aegon's claim. The marriage of the king's son to the last Targaryen daughter was widely celebrated. Aegon, inheriting his father's good heart and his mother Elias' warmth, was popular with the small folk. Princess Rhaenys, now 19, was in Dorne, with her betrothed Trystane Martell, strengthening that alliance. Prince Viserys Targaryen, however, had grown into a proud and restless man of 23. Viserys was often overheard boasting that he would make a better king than his bookish brother Aegon, or sneering that the realm had gone soft. Rhaegar wisely kept Viserys busy with trivial appointments and comforts. He named Viserys Master of Laws after Jon Arryn passed, a mostly honorary position since Tywin and the council handled the real legwork, and showered him with titles like Guardian of the Narrow Sea. Despite the king's efforts, Viserys nursed private resentment. He felt robbed of a crown twice, first by Robert's rebellion, which nearly wiped them out, and now by Rhaegar's line continuing before him. In truth, Viserys had no real claim while Rhaegar and Aegon lived, but his covetous nature made him bitter. He found companions among some malcontent lords at court, like the red wine-blotched Lord Bracken, who still hated the Targaryens for favoritism shown to the Blackwoods, or certain Reach Knights who preferred a more warlike king. They became a quiet faction, muttering that King Rhaegar was too fixated on ancient prophecies and omens, and that Prince Aegon was half Dornish and coddled. They whispered that Viserys, a true dragon, might lead Westeros to glory. It was mostly idle court gossip. Rhaegar's reign was too secure for open plots, but the seeds of possible future strife existed, largely unbeknownst to the king. And what of Jon Snow, the boy for whom so much had been risked? He grew up at Winterfell in the shadow of presumed bastardy, alongside his half-siblings Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon Stark. Jon was a quiet, thoughtful child, favoring solitude, or the company of his direwolf Ghost, a unique runt of the litter found by the Stark children in 297. He had the look of the Starks' long face, dark hair, but with Rhaegar's soulful eyes of deep indigo. Ned would tell others they were the Tully, blue of his mother, to explain it away. Jon always felt a bit apart, not understanding why Catelyn Stark looked at him with ill-concealed pain, or why Ned was so protective yet distant at times. Ned, for his part, loved Jon dearly as a link to Lyanna, but he could never allow himself to show it too openly, for fear of arousing questions. So Jon grew up yearning for acceptance and answers about his mother. Ned only ever gave the boy one clue. She was of noble blood, and her name was Willa, a lie he had concocted, using Ashara Dane's former handmaiden as a cover story, the same lie he told Robert Baratheon in another timeline. Jon, a perceptive lad, doubted this tale as he got older. He knew there was more to his story. Why did Ned Stark call Rhaegar the honorable foe with such a complicated tone? Why did he vigilantly forbid Jon from even joking about going south to King's Landing? Once, Jon had playfully quipped at age 12 that maybe he'd join the Goldcloaks in the city one day. Ned's stern reaction shocked him. There were hints and ghosts of the past swirling around Jon, but he remained unaware of his true heritage. As Jon neared adulthood, he considered joining the Night's Watch. The Wall felt like a place a bastard could make worth of himself. When he broached the idea during King Rhaegar's visit to Winterfell in 297, Ned forbade it sharply. Jon was surprised. He thought his father, as he believed Ned to be, would approve a noble path for him. But Ned growled, "I have other plans for you, Jon." Perhaps Ned foresaw that one day Jon's true lineage might need to be revealed, and he wanted Jon available, not cloistered in black. Or perhaps, more simply, Ned could not bear to send Lyanna's son to the harsh wall to live out a life of celibacy and hardship. Interestingly, Rhaegar himself met Jon Snow at Winterfell on that royal progress. Albeit briefly, Jon helped Bran practice archery in the courtyard while the king's party was present. King Rhaegar watched the boy from afar with an unreadable expression. At one point, Arya Stark, wild and curious, pulled Jon over to introduce him to the king. Not knowing anything, of course it was the innocent action of a girl eager for her half-brother to share in the excitement. Jon bowed clumsily before Rhaegar, who bid him rise and asked his name. "Jon Snow, your grace," he said. Rhaegar's eyes flickered with some emotion, but he simply nodded and remarked, "You have the look of the North." Arya, oblivious, chimed in that Jon was the best sword fighter of all her brothers, and could one day be a knight in the king's guard. Rhaegar offered a small, sad smile. "I am certain he will serve the realm in ways none of us yet know," the king said quietly before moving on. Jon felt an odd kinship, or warmth from that encounter, as brief as it was. He had no idea he had just spoken with his true father. The year 300 AC approached, and a long summer neared its end. Maesters predicted an especially harsh winter to come. Dark wings, dark words came from the Wall Lord Commander Jorah Mormont, wrote that his rangers were finding piles of corpses in the snow, wildling villages abandoned, and strange blue-eyed figures in the woods. King Rhaegar read these reports with mounting dread. He called his closest counselors by now an inner circle, including Prince Aegon, hand of the King Tywin, aged but still shrewd, and yes, Lord Eddard Stark, whom he had asked to come south for a great council meeting on the Wall's affairs. In the Red Keep small council chamber, lit by dragonfire brazier, these leaders of Westeros weighed the unthinkable that the ancient enemy, the White Walkers, might have returned. Some were skeptical. Tywin grunted that Grumpkins and Snarks are a tale for nursemaids, but Ned Stark silenced the doubt by producing a skull brought by a ranger, the skull of a wildling, its eye socket stuffed with blue crystal shards, and its bone marked by what looked like frostbite burns. Something very real and very deadly was moving south of the wall. King Rhaegar stood and announced they would not sit idle. He would not be the fool that dismissed prophecy and paid with the realm's soul. He declared the great war not of man against man, but of the living against the dead was at hand. We must unite, Rhaegar said, eyes shining with almost religious fervor, for the Night's King and his cold legions will not spare anyone, high or low. Letters went out under the king's seal to every lord in Westeros, calling them to prepare their levies for a campaign beyond the wall come spring. Dragonglass and wildfire were to be sent north in abundance. Rhaegar even dispatched envoys across the narrow sea, seeking any last rumored dragon eggs or ancient weapons that might help, though none were found in time. And so, as the long night of winter approached, Westeros, still divided by subtle suspicions and ancient grudges, now faced a threat that demanded they stand as one people. King Rhaegar Targaryen had won the Trident and kept his crown through wisdom and mercy, but now he would be tested in the crucible of a far more terrifying war, one that cared not for bloodlines or titles. In Winterfell's Godswood, on the eve of the army's departure north, Rhaegar met Jon Snow one more time. Perhaps Ned had told Rhaegar that Jon wished to join the fight against the Walkers. The boy had a heroic streak, much like a certain young Lyanna Stark once did. By a heart tree dripping red sap, the king regarded the 16-year-old Jon. How it must have pained him not to say the words, "I am your father." Instead, Rhaegar clasped Jon's shoulder and said, "The blood of the dragon and the wolf runs strong in you. Honor that, Jon, and guard it well." Jon, perplexed by such an intimate tone from the king, simply said he would do his duty. With a final look, a father's proud, sorrowful look, Rhaegar turned and left. He donned his armor, the same gleaming suit inlaid with rubies that he had worn at the Trident long ago. Those ruby symbols of the blood spilled and lives altered that day still shone. One was missing, lost in the river, but the rest were intact. Perhaps the missing ruby signified Lyanna, gone, but never forgotten. Under the darkening sky, the united host of Westeros northern bannermen, crowned knights, Dornish spears, Reach cavalry, all banners side by side, marched beyond the wall, torches flickering like a living river of fire in the snow. At their head rode King Rhaegar, with Prince Aegon, Lord Commander Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard. Yes, Jaime had been named to lead the Kingsguard after Barristan retired due to age and injury, and Lord Eddard Stark, with Jon Snow by his side. The cold winds howled, and eerie blue lights flickered in the far distance of the haunted forest. But the living rode on, hearts fearful, yet resolute, and here we leave them on the brink of a war for the dawn, a war Rhaegar Targaryen had long foreseen in his dreams and nightmares. Westeros had known 17 years of the dragon's peace, hard-earned and sometimes uneasy, but peace nonetheless. Now the true test came. In this world, Rhaegar won the Trident and took the Iron Throne, changing so many fates. He spared the realm another long civil war of 5 kings. He welcomed Daenerys home, rather than see her exiled. He raised a generation in relative harmony, yet the song of ice and fire was not finished. As the armies of life and death converged in the falling snow, one could only wonder, would Rhaegar's choices, his mercy and his secret sacrifices, be enough to save the realm when the dead swept down upon them? Would Jon Snow, the hidden prince, fulfill the destiny for which his father had risked everything? Those answers lay hidden in the darkness of the long night, awaiting the final chords of the song. But one thing was certain. Thanks to Rhaegar's victory at the Trident and the alliances he forged afterward, the living stood a fighting chance, united under the banner of the dragon and the wolf, against the encroaching cold that cared nothing for thrones. In the end, that chance was all that mattered. The rest of this tale would be written in graceful Valyrian steel and gritty northern courage, in fire and in ice. The realm held its breath, and the curtain fell on the world as we knew it, heralding a dawn either of salvation or eternal night.